We need to know more about how renewable energy projects are affecting people who, for no fault of their own, must live with the consequences or suffer losses directly as a result of these projects. Now, the erection of massive transmission towers in Victoria causing a headache for the government and for farmers fighting back. Our guest today is Geoffrey Brown, who can spell out for us what people are facing. By the way, Geoffrey Brown is a Senior Director at Lord, LAWD, leading its Specialised Valuations business unit. With more than 34 years continuous experience in property valuations, Geoffrey is considered one of Australia's preeminent specialist valuers. He's been involved in windfarm and forestry valuations in Victoria and New South Wales. Now, during his career, he's built a strong reputation for his expertise in compulsory acquisitions, having worked on some of Australia's most significant infrastructure and economy building projects. First of all, Geoffrey, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It's it's sort of like politics gone nuts at the moment in Victoria. What's your overview of the whole situation?
Oh, well, the renewable energy projects are obviously happening across the state. A lot of wind farms have gone in historically that really cannot work efficiently and get the power into the grid. So there's significant changes at the moment occurring with the Western Renewables project and a couple of other projects in Victoria and also New South Wales to connect existing wind farm operations plus future solar farms and further wind farm projects into the grid. So that's what's happening at the moment, and negotiations occurring and potentially compulsory acquisitions over these matters.
And we've seen what the farmers think about it, and nothing better than an angry farmer. They're trying to protect their own livelihood, a bit like coming into someone's shop on Glenferrie Road and says, we're going to come into your shop, we're going to do some surveying here, and we're going to plonk this meter right in the middle of the shop. I would imagine the shopkeeper would not be very happy with that at all. And the same thing with the farmers. Can you point out the scale of the problem in parts of Australia where transmission towers will be required to be built on a private land?
Well, the major project in Victoria at the moment is the Western Renewables project, one through Western Victoria. That's a power line that's a 70 metre wide easement. It's approximately 80 metres tall, so it's a major project and substantially larger than the traditional SEC or State Electricity Commission towers that we currently have through Gippsland and Western Victoria. So yeah, it's a major infrastructure project.
I just want to know, companies like VicGrid, do they just pay for the land they're using, or do they pay for the whole farm?
No, it's in between. There is compensation payable for the market value of the interest acquired, which is the easement interest for where the power line sits. Mm-hmm. There's also compensation paid for the devaluation of your property, which is the balance of the land. Under the Land Acquisition and Compensation Act in Victoria, it's called severance, injurious affection. In New South Wales, compensation's assessed under the Just Terms Act. So there's mechanisms where the market value of your property is assessed in the before situation, unaffected by the power line, and then in the after situation, being affected by the power line and the consequences it has, both in regards to your farming activities, everyday production, productivity, but also amenity associated with the balance of the property.
There's also the headache too of the neighbours. It doesn't do the neighbours' valuation much chop either, does it?
Correct. And under the Victorian legislation, the neighbours, if you're not actually touched by the easement or the proposed power line easement in any way, shape or form, you don't get any form of compensation. So it could be on the boundary of your property. You have all the impacts of the aesthetics issues associated with it. Obviously, you don't have impacts on productivity, but you have the impacts of the severance and potential devaluation of your property, and yes, you're not compensated. And the problem in Victoria at the moment associated with that, and it's even road acquisitions, no difference, it can divide communities and affect friendships, etc., in local areas.
Even with the wind turbines, if they plonk those up, just say if it's on the boundary, for example, it's 400 metres either side that the actual I think subsonic noise or whatever they call it affects anything around it. This is in the Great Dividing Range where they're putting up those monstrosities, 400 metres either side. They're saying that the native wildlife will never settle there because it just doesn't, it will create damage. So if we're looking at that, if you had just say a turbine, for example, you would have to then say from one point to the other side, there's about a kilometre that is really unusable. Now you talk about compensation. I'm a bit intrigued with this part. If they, just say for example, you have a whopping power line or a bunch of turbines on those properties because we need to save the planet and get the energy from other sources or other wind farms. How can they work out what damage it is going to do? Because, I mean, even though I would imagine the farmer who gives into this will be saying, at least I'm getting something back, over a fairly small period of time, I could see that the valuation would just diminish greatly, and it would probably make that land quite inhospitable to farming.
Yeah, it all depends. Under the Act or the Land Acquisition and Compensation Act in Victoria and the Just Terms Act in New South Wales, etc., it's the valuers who are trying to determine the long-term impacts of the property and the loss of value associated with the property. Now, for example, if you're in cropping, and a lot of Western Victoria is cropping country, so if it's diagonally, the easement's going diagonally through the property, the effect on your enterprise is quite severe. You've got reduced cropping areas, your loss of productivity in perpetuity. So as valuers and agricultural consultants, we try to determine the actual loss of profitability and income in perpetuity. So you're looking at the net present value of that cash flow and also the diminution in your land value associated with that, because if you can't farm it, you're not going to pay for it. And therefore also looking at the amenity. So it really comes down to the valuers acting on behalf of the landowners and the government to try to determine the compensation payable to satisfy or offset the issue of the creation of the easement and the construction of the power line.
And they can come onto your property at will now, can't they?
In Victoria, there is legislation that changed recently. There is fines and timeframes, etc., if you don't let them on your property. That's correct.
So, okay, they're saying that, and by the way, I don't agree with those valuations at all, but they're saying that for loss of income, damage done or whatever. What about the implications for the mental health? Remember that the ads years ago? You probably would recall those from Edgels, and the guy got out and looked at his farm. There was probably peas and stuff or corn, and he had a cup of tea and he just looked at it and thought, yeah, beauty. That's a thing of the past, because probably what he'd be doing, getting out there looking at this great wind turbine, or looking at these transmission lines. How do we compensate for destruction of lifestyle?
Yeah, that's really the amenity component I was talking about in regards to the severance or the diminution in the value of the balance of the land. So when they're standing at their front veranda or on their porch, as you talk about the Edsel ad and looking across your paddock, you're now seeing power lines. So the valuers try to assess the diminution in value of the balance of the land, and that's severance. And there's also under the Act called solatium, which is associated with up to 10% of the market value of the land acquired, which is really an additional payment for that impact that you're having on your effectively associated with the process of the acquisition, all the time you spent, and that impact on your personal health. And that can be up to 10% under the Victorian Land Acquisition and Compensation Act.
just imagine you've got this pasture, or say farm, we stick to things that grow on the ground. Got big farm, and straight through it, a renewable effigy of some sort, whether it's a turbine or whether it's the transmission tower. And so they say, you basically have to lump it, or you can leave. So the guy says, I'm going to stay. What will that do to the value, even though he's been compensated? And if you look, if you buy a car, say bought a car 10 years ago, it's double now. So if you're working out compensation for a farmer, how do you work that compensation out? Because what it's worth now, if you go looking at the example of the car, if you go 10 years time, the farmer's worth a lot more. So and then 20 years time from that, if you look at farmers, they hand it down to the generation to generation to generation to generation. How do we get to a price that's fair, or is it always going to be unfair, and you either take it or leave?
Well, that's the whole purpose of the Act, to try to make it fair. In relation to the compensation payable as at the date of compulsory acquisition. So if you received a notice of acquisition today, that's the date. Even if you're still arguing about the compensation in 5 years' time, it's about the date the notice of acquisition was served under the Land Acquisition and Compensation Act. So the way valuers assess it is look at comparable sales and assess the market value of the property unaffected by the power line easements. Then we look at a wider suite of sales in relation to properties that are sold that have already been impacted by a power line. In the case of the Western Renewables, it's such a significant power line, there's not a great body of evidence that shows how the impact is. But it's up to the valuers to try to decide. Under the Land Acquisition and Compensation in Victoria, you have the right to appeal, go to the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal if your valuer is still saying that the compensation offered is insufficient, or the Supreme Court. You've got both options to appeal it once served a notice of acquisition over time.
And I think the government will pay for legal action on your behalf, so you're not put out, but it's you've got a big fight on your hands. This still seems very unfair, because I'm from the land, from the bush, and if I saw someone putting big power lines and towers and stuff in my property, I know it would have broke my father's heart. How do you? Because it's not fair. How do we change it? We can't change the government, because government, regardless, the Conservatives will do the same thing. How do we get some fair? Because it's all very well saying, well, we're going to give you a fair price, we're going to build that in, and blah blah blah. The bloke may not want to sell.
Yep, that's right. Unfortunately, under the legislation, it's a compulsory acquisition. The legislation is there. It's happened with roads. Compulsory acquisition, people lose their houses, but that's what the legislation's there for, to try to put you in the same position you were in before the acquisition, whether it's a whole acquisition, partial acquisition, or in the cases of power lines, a acquisition of an interest in your property. So the Act has tried to set up for the compensation to be fair and reasonable. But yes, it does have an impact on you, especially if properties have been in the family for generations. It all comes down to market value. It's very difficult to compensate on a monetary basis the impact of an interest being acquired that's on a generational property.
We know lots of farmers, lots of people on the land, and they're not happy. And one of the issues, first of all, I don't agree with what government's doing, because there's a great number of people who understand that the renewables, as Malcolm Roberts would say, Senator Malcolm Roberts, are the unreliables. We had a guy on yesterday, of all things, talking about wind droughts. I've never heard of it. Apparently there are wind droughts. It means there is no wind. So we're going ahead to install something that has been proven to be ineffective, and it's been proven not to have worked properly. Yet we're still doing this, and we're destroying people's lives. So the next thing is, we played a video yesterday. A farmer, they came onto his land, or wanted to come onto his land to survey it. He told them to go away in farmer speak. They left, but they're going to come back again. This time they'll come back with the police. This would have to be almost like a nuclear bomb going off in communities, wouldn't it?
In some regards it is, because some farmers are happy to have monetary compensation. Other farmers don't want the power lines at all. Yes, it divides communities, as I said before, especially when the power lines are perhaps going up next to the property next door and you're not receiving any compensation, but you actually have to deal with the aesthetic nature of it. My view, and such as I'm trying to deal with it, is to try, as a valuer, to try to obtain the best compensation possible for the farmers that are directly affected. So that's my role as a valuer, to achieve that.
We're looking very much like communist China at the moment, and it's something we need to. If someone doesn't want to sell their land, they've got every right not to sell it. Somebody doesn't want to have these monstrosities on the land. If they were an essential service that was reliable and all the other things, perhaps you might have a slight argument. But as they feed for example, they feed the nation and feed Melbourne.
That's correct. They do. Mm.
So what we're saying is, and this is the part I don't understand. I go right back to the start of the show. The politics have gone nuts because they're saving the planet, and in doing so, they're destroying it. And I don't understand what recourse can they. I mean, you mentioned the Supreme Court, and you mentioned this and that. If you see how courts go, it takes a long time.
It does take a long time, and if you're in the court system, in VCAT or the Supreme Court, pursuant to the Victorian legislation, you could be there for another 4 years, still arguing about the compensation that you're assessed. I've had matters that drag on nearly 10 years, and it still all relates to the date the notice of acquisition was served. So whether your value of your property goes up or down post the acquisition, it doesn't matter. It is all about the date of acquisition.
It's incredible. What if they just say no?
If farmers actually say no, ultimately a notice in Victoria, a notice of intention to acquire will be issued, and a notice of acquisition will be issued if the Western Renewables project's given approval.
So they can then still, if you say no, I mean, because we see similar situations around Europe and even in the UK, government wants to come in, and for example, in the UK, they were going to do an inheritance tax there. And there was enough outrage from all communities that they backed off. And that was a budgetary insert into the budget. It was going to pay off a lot of bills for the government. So for them to go, no, we're not going to do that. We'll listen to what the farmers are saying and the community is saying. Can they do the same in Victoria? Because it is not what Australia should be. We should be, and we used to be a very fair country, and at the moment, this is highly unfair. And it's I can see people, excuse the French, topping themselves because of this.
Well, none of us want that.
No, we don't.
No, none of us want that. Look, the Farmers Federation, it's all about lobbying your local members and other members in regards to the project, like any other government policy. It's all subject to lobbying efforts to try to change their directory in relation to the development of renewable energy and the associated infrastructure.
Yeah, I'm just appalled. Truly, makes me ashamed. I mean, it really does make me feel quite ashamed of what we've become. And we're talking yesterday to some people, and they were, a lot of people in the major cities are not aware of the severity and the impact of these projects. And I don't know how we used to be big, we're not big anymore. So we don't know how to get the message out, but I'm sure if people knew that their neighbours were going to be treated like this and it's treated like a piece of nothing, I'm sure Australia would do something. And I genuinely feel very sad for them because it's very hard to fight government, isn't it? It costs you money, costs you a lot of will. They got every penny under the sun and resource there. They can win any fight they want to, and I find it appalling that this is happening to good people and to the communities and to the bush. Geoffrey, you've been fantastic. I appreciate your time and I appreciate your knowledge and your foresight and your candidness. If somebody wants to have a conversation with you, how do they do that?
Yeah, well, they can go to our website and get my details, LAWD website, and make contact with me. That's not a problem.
Geoffrey Brown, thank you so much for your time. I'd like to revisit this too down the track. I don't know what they could do. I mean, if we put ourselves into their gumboots, we'd find ourselves I'd be very distressed, having no way to turn. If you know that it's a bit like dying and you can't get away from it, one day you are going to die. And as for these farmers, their livelihood, their history, their heritage, their families, community, it's going to be buggered. Geoffrey Brown, thank you so much for your time.